I am so honored to join the Perez Center for Peace and Innovation in remembering an extraordinary man. President Shimon Peres was not only one of the founding leaders of the State of Israel, he was a global leader who inspired so many of us. He was a great friend of America and a great friend to me and countless others. I had the honor of working closely with him over the years as First Lady, as Senator from New York, as Secretary of State. He was not only a friend, but really a mentor to both my husband and me. In particular, I always admired his unique ability to pair big dreams and a bold vision for the future with meticulous attention to detail. I don't think the man ever forgot anything. So yes, he was innovative and creative, especially when it came to working to achieve peace with Israel's neighbors and building on the special relationship between Israel and the United States. But above all else, President Peres was an optimist. He believed in a better future. He believed a better future was not only possible, but absolutely within reach. He often said we should use our imagination more than our memory. He spent his life working relentlessly to make the world a better place for everyone. And I'm especially grateful that in this unprecedented moment, for the work that the Peres Center is doing to carry his vision forward.
Royal Palace, Amman, 2nd of September, 2020. Dear Chemi, it is with great respect and admiration that I, along with many others, remember a visionary colleague and wise statesman today. No friend of offensive, polarized politics, President Peres embodied the courage, the will, and the integrity that typifies an era of leaders regrettably bygone. A veteran of both war and peace, Shimon embodied both the qualities of a formidable general and the virtues of a committed peacemaker. I remember well the Jordanian-Israeli joint venture for humanitarian aid to the people of Bosnia, which he supported unconditionally when the Israeli and Jordanian planes landed together in Bosnia in July 1995. When it most mattered and against all odds, Shimon mustered the courage for dialogue, the strength for patience, and the conviction to persist. In the noble but difficult art of peace, true peacemakers stand on the shoulders of a giant. Yours most sincerely, Prince El Hassan bin Talal.
President Peres knew the dangers of war. That is why he made efforts to further world peace. All of us, the peoples of India and Israel, will continue to work together to realize his great vision, a vision of a 21st century partnership between our great ancient civilizations. We owe this to him. I pay my tributes to President Peres. His life and work will continue to inspire humanity.
שלום לכולם, יש איתנו פה היום נערות ונערים, תלמידים ותלמידות מכל הארץ, משש רשתות חינוך, ביניהם ברנקו וייס, עמית, עמל, אות, דרכה ורשת עתיד. נערים ונערות שמייצגים מבחינתנו את הגיוון החברתי שיש בחברה הישראלית במדינת ישראל, שבאו לשתף כאן באזכרה של פרס, להשמיע את הקול שלהם, של הדור הצעיר, בדיוק כמו ששמעון פרס היה רוצה. הספר האחרון שפרס כתב נקרא אין מקום לחלומות קטנים. הוא תמיד אמר שהוא כתב אותו אליכם, אל הדור הצעיר. הוא מורכב מ6 פרקים שמדברים על בעצם 6 אירועים מכוננים, משמעותיים בחייו, ובחינה של מה הוא בעצם למד מתוך האירועים האלה, ואילו המלצות, אילו טיפים הוא בעצם נותן לכם, לדור הצעיר. והוא דיבר גם המון על חלומות, כי מבחינתו חלומות, אין מקום לחלומות קטנים, תמיד צריך לחלום בגדול. אז אני מפנה את זה עכשיו אליכם. מה החלום שלכם?
אוקיי, כשאני אגדל אני רוצה להיות רופאה, אבל זה הרבה יותר מזה. אני רוצה לשבור את תקרת הזכוכית. אני גם אתיופית וגם אישה, ובגלל זה לפעמים אני מרגישה שיש לי מכשולים. אני רוצה שאנשים יסתכלו על זה בתור שווים. אני לא רוצה שיסתכלו על אנשים בתור חלק מסטיגמה. אז אני אישה, אז אני אתיופית, אבל אני ליאל. אני יותר מזה, אני הרבה יותר מזה. אז אני פשוט רוצה שילדים יעזו לחלום, שהם לא יפחדו להגשים את עצמם, שאנחנו נוכל להיות חברה יותר מקבלת ויותר רגישה.
מרין?
החלום שלי הוא להיות פסיכולוגית, אבל חוץ מזה גם יש לי חלום שבעצם להרוס את הגבולות שבעולם, שיש שלום בין כל המדינות, כי בשבילי, מאז שאני קטנה, יש לי חברות כאילו באינטרנט שהן מדינות ערביות, או מדינות שאנחנו לא ממש ביחסים איתן, אז ממש שנוכל ללכת ולהכיר אנשים חדשים, תרבויות חדשות.
מזרח תיכון חדש, לגמרי.
החלום שלי הוא בעצם לייצג את ישראל כשגרירה ברחבי העולם. הייתי רוצה לייצג אותה ולגרום לאנשים אחרים גם להתאהב בה כמוני, והייתי רוצה שאנשים אחרים וגם מעצמות אחרות ומדינות יראו את היכולות שלה ואת החזקות שלה.
אני הייתי רוצה לעזור למדינות עולם שלישי, עד כמה שזה אפשרי, וחוץ מלבקר כתיירת, לעזור ולהעלות אותם ברמה מבחינת החיים.
לשפר את החיים.
כן.
ניק?
אני מאמין שאני רוצה להתגייס לצה"ל ולהיות חובל, לעבור קורס חובלים. אני רוצה לתרום למדינה, ואני רוצה לאחר מכן גם ללכת ללימודי רפואה.
בהצלחה לשניכם. סופי ותומר, מה החלום שלכם?
אני חולם להוביל שינוי חברתי של יותר הפצת אהבת חינם ופחות שנאת חינם ויותר קבלת השונה וקבלת האחר, ושוויון ושוויון הזדמנויות. זה חשוב לי כל כך, וזה החלום שלי, שנצליח להוביל איזשהו שינוי.
החלום שלי הוא יותר להקנות לאנשים הרגלי חיים בריאים יותר. ספורט זה חלק ממש חשוב ממני, אז גם הייתי רוצה שיתנו חשיבות יותר גדולה לספורט נשים. הייתי רוצה שסך הכל כמה שיותר אנשים יחיו בחיים מאושרים ושמחים ובריאים, וזהו.
החלומות שלכם ממש מעוררי השראה.
החלומות שלי הם יותר מדי מגוונים. אני כמו ניק, אם שמעתי נכון, גם רוצה להיות חובל בצבא, רוצה ללמוד מדעים מדויקים וללמוד על דתות ותרבויות. כאילו כל הקצוות. בזמן שאני אלמד על כל מיני תרבויות ודתות שונות, כמו מיתולוגיות, אני ארצה להשתמש בזה כדי בעצם לגשר בין אנשים, בין דתות.
אל תגיד שזה יותר מדי מגוון. זה כל הקטע, באמת אני אומרת, זה גם היופי, בזה שזה רב תחומי, שזה מגוון. זה מה שהופך אתכם לאנשים סופר מיוחדים ומעניינים. ויש לנו את יובל. מה החלום שלך?
החלום שלי זה להצליח בכל מה שאני ארצה לעשות, ובעיקר להיות מסופק במה שאני עושה. כאילו, כל מה שאני אעסוק בו בחיים, אני יודע שאני אכוון אליו הכי גבוה שיש, וכאילו מזה גם לקחתי השראה מפרס, שהוא אומר כאילו, אין מקום לחלום בקטן, זה הכל לחלום בגדול, ולהיות מסופק בעצם ממה שאני אעשה. אני רוצה להיות יזם, אני רוצה להשפיע, להצליח ולהרגיש שאני כאילו, לעשות את המיטב במה שאני יכול בעצם.
החלום שלי להיות עורכת דין, ולאחר מכך להיות שופטת, שעושה שוויון בין בני אדם. זה לא כולל את ערבי ויהודי, זה כולל כאילו מכל דת ומכל מגזר, זה לא משנה לי, העיקר בן אדם. ואם אני רוצה להתחיל לספר על החלומות שלי, אני לא יכולה לעצור. מי אמר שלחלומות יש גבול בכלל? אין מקום לחלומות קטנים.
Shimon Peres for me was an inspiration, a role model, and of course a great friend. We shared the same beliefs and interests in peace, in innovation, and in what goes to make up the right qualities for leadership. And that, of course, is why Shimon Center is the Center for Peace and Innovation. You know, when I think now about what Shimon will be thinking about today's world, today's times. First of all, of course, he'd be delighted at the progress that Israel has made in its relations with the Arab world, and most notably in the agreement with the United Arab Emirates. He was a huge advocate, not just for peace, but for cultural acceptance and coexistence. And Shimon was a great leader. He was a great leader because he had vision, attention to practical detail, and because he was brave. He was prepared to take courageous steps in furtherance of things he believed in. That's the hallmark of a great leader.
President Peres lived a momentous life in service to his country. We remember him for his firm commitment to peace, which always articulated with wit and grace despite all the challenges. We identify with his vision of global collaboration in the pursuit of a brighter future for all our children. We would do well to remember that peace and security are the precondition for human well-being and progress in Israel and throughout the world. As Shimon Peres said, peace is not a political choice. It is a basic historic and moral choice. May the work of the Peres Center for Peace and Innovation continue to keep President Peres' ideas alive in the minds of young people for generations to come.
Cela fait 4 ans maintenant que Shimon Peres est parti. Je veux dire que sa voix, sa personne, son tempérament, ses idées manquent au monde. C'est un grand dirigeant au service de la paix qui a perdu le monde, et moi, c'est un ami très cher avec lequel j'aimais parler. Shimon Peres nous manque parce que dans ce monde déboussolé et inquiet, des paroles de paix, de compromis, de dialogue manquent comme jamais ils n'ont manqué. Je veux dire à sa famille, je veux dire à ses amis que je ne l'ai pas oublié, que son exemple reste vivant, que sa personne irradie nos pensées et que lui-même, à titre personnel, c'est un homme à qui je pense beaucoup.
דברים בשם מרכז פרס לשלום ולחדשנות. אני מתכבד להזמין את בנו של שמעון פרס ויושב ראש מרכז פרס לשלום ולחדשנות, נחמיה חמי פרס, לשאת דברים לזכרו.
ארבע שנים חלפו מאז נפרדנו לתמיד מאבינו היקר, מייסד מרכז פרס לשלום ולחדשנות, ראש הממשלה השמיני ונשיאה התשיעי של מדינת ישראל, והוא חסר לנו מדי יום. לו היה איתנו היום, היה ודאי נרגש לראות כיצד חזונו למזרח תיכון חדש קורם אור וגידים. מזרח תיכון של שלום, לא שדות הרג. מזרח תיכון עליו חלם, אותו הגה, את יסודותיו הניח, ולמימושו פעל ללא לאות. הסכמי השלום עם איחוד האמירויות הערבי הם צעד נוסף בדרך למימוש חזונו הגדול. לאורך שירותו כאדריכל עוצמתה הביטחונית של ישראל, הקים את הכור הגרעיני בדימונה, את התעשייה האווירית בלוד, ובנה תשתיות הצבא והתעשייה הביטחונית בכל רחבי הארץ. יסודות השלום מושתתים על עוצמתנו הביטחונית והמוסרית. לו חווה איתנו את משבר הקורונה, היה פועל ללא לאות לאחדות העם. דורש מאיתנו ערבות הדדית. כך פעל כראש ממשלה בשנת 1984, עת כלכלת ישראל קרסה. מבלי לומר נואש, ליכד את העם ואת מנהיגיו, והוביל בנחישות את יציאתנו מהמשבר העמוק ביותר שידענו, אל עידן חדש של צמיחה כאומת חדשנות, כאומת הסטארט-אפ המשגשגת שאנו היום. את חייו הקדיש לחזון ולעשייה. נאמן לבנייתה של המדינה, לוחם על ביטחונה ולמען השלום, ללא חת וללא מורא. חולם ומגשים. ראה עצמו כמשרת את עמו, באהבה ללא סייג, עושה ככל יכולתו למען שגשוגה. אבא היה אוהב אדם, איש של שלום, מהאבות המייסדים של המדינה. מעולם לא פחד לחלום, והפגין תעוזה יוצא דופן. את מרכז פרס לשלום ולחדשנות הקים וטיפח לאורך שנים רבות, ואותו הקדיש לדור הצעיר של מדינת ישראל. מרכז לשלום שפועל לקירוב לבבות, לחיים משותפים, לשוויון ולאחווה. אבא ביקש שנאמין בעצמנו ושנבטח ביכולתנו לעצב עולם טוב יותר. להביט תמיד קדימה בתקווה. לעולם לא לומר נואש. לא לפחד לחלום. להגשים חלומות רבים ככל האפשר. תמיד להיות אופטימי. תמיד להעיז, לעשות ולחלום בגדול. יהי זכרו ברוך לכל הדורות.
שמעון פרס דיבר המון על העתיד. הוא דיבר על זה שצריך לעשות היום כדי לטפל במחר, וכל הזמן לדמיין איך ייראה העתיד, לחשוב בצורה יצירתית, מחוץ לקופסה, איך לפתור את הבעיות של העתיד. מה אתם הייתם רוצים לשנות כדי שיהיה עולם טוב יותר?
קודם כל, לפי דעתי, כדי לייצר עתיד טוב יותר, הייתי מפיצה אהבה, אהבת אמת, אהבה חינם כאילו. ולא רק נגיד ערבי ויהודי לכל הזולות ולכל אדם אשר הוא.
הבאה שאני חושבת הכי חשובה כרגע זה ההתחממות הגלובלית. אני הייתי רוצה שנפסיק את כל הרגלי הזיהום שלנו, להפסיק שימוש בפלסטיק, להפחית שימוש במכוניות מזהמות, יותר למחזר, לעבור לאנרגיה ירוקה ומתחדשת. אני חושבת שזה פעולות שחייב לקחת עכשיו והכי מהר שאפשר, כי אחר כך לא יהיה עולם לחיות בו. זה ממש חשוב לנו, לילדים שלנו, לנכדים, וחשוב שיהיה עולם נקי, בריא, עם טבע.
אני הייתי משנה את הדרך בו אנחנו רואים אחד את השני, ממש ללמוד, לקבל אחד את השני כמו שהוא, ולהבין אותו, ואולי גם הקמת מרכזי הסברה לבני הנוער על כבוד לאדם, על שלום ועל אהבה, שבאמת נראה אחד את השני כחברים, לא כמשפוט אחד את השני.
אני הייתי משנה את הדעות הקדומות בין כל העמים בכל העולם, והייתי מחנכת כבר מגיל קטן לדו-קיום.
אני הייתי רוצה לשנות, נראה לי שכמו כל בן אדם בעולם הזה, את הגזענות שיש בעולם, שלא יהיה בעצם לשפוט אנשים על הבדלי דת, גזע ומין. אנחנו רואים שאנשים מדברים אחד לשני ורואים שיש להם כבר דעות קדומות ומתייגים את האנשים לפני, ובעצם צריך לדעת לקבל את האדם ולתת לו לבטא את עצמו, אולי אפילו תרבות דיון. זה מה שצריך לשנות אצלנו בארץ, כאילו נראה לי מובן מאליו.
אני הייתי רוצה לחיות בעתיד שבו אדם נמדד על מישהו על פי משהו באמת, כי אני מרגיש שהרבה פעמים יש המון תוויות והמון תגיות שבן אדם אומר על עצמו כי הוא מה שהם, אבל זה מציב לו מיידית איזושהי תקרת זכוכית שמאוד מאוד קשה לו לעבור, בין אם זה אנשים שתוקים לו רגליים או שהוא לא מאמין בעצמו מלכתחילה. ואם באמת אנחנו נתחיל להסתכל על האנשים על פי מי שהם, ואז על כל שאר הדברים שהם מכילים, אולי באמת נוכל לבנות איזושהי חברה מתוקנת כאן בישראל או בכלל בעולם.
הייתי רוצה דווקא לצטט את פרס, הוא אמר, אני נפרד מתפקידי כנשיא, אך לא מחובתי כאזרח. מה שאני הייתי רוצה לשנות, זה שהפוליטיקאים, המנהיגים, הם יותר כמו פרס בעצם. הייתי רוצה שהם יהיו יותר אנושיים, פחות להתרכז בפוליטיקה, יותר לשים דגש על האנושיות בתור מנהיגים. כמו שזה מתחיל בחינוך, ככה אנחנו גם מסתכלים בתקשורת על האנשים שבעצם בשליטה על המדינה שלנו. אז אם הם היו קצת יותר מראים התחשבות גם בערכים האלה, ופחות בערכים יותר שוליים מבחינתי לפחות.
הייתי רוצה לשנות את איך שמשרד החינוך רואה אותנו, התלמידים, כי בזמן האחרון, לפחות התלמידים, מרגישים שמשרד החינוך רואה אותנו יותר כמכונות, מכווין יותר ללימודים מסוג מסוים, ושוכח את השם שלו, משרד החינוך.
הכל מתחיל בחינוך. אין מספיק מודעות להמון דברים אצלנו בבית ספר, מלמדים דברים שהם מאוד חשובים, אבל בעידן הזה לפחות, כרגע אני חושבת שיש דברים שהם חשובים לא פחות. אם זה תרבויות שונות שצריך לעמד, אם זה כללי התנהגות, יש גם המון נושאים שלא מעלים אותם. אפשר קצת להוריד את הלחץ מהציונים, כאילו הציונים לא קובעים מי אתה. אז אם במקום להתמקד בציונים, מערכת החינוך תתמקד בשוויון, בקבלת האחר, ללמד את הילד לאהוב את עצמו, יש כל כך הרבה ילדים שלא בטוחים בעצמם ולא אוהבים את עצמם, וזה נוראי. ואם נחנך את הילדים גם להאמין שהכל אפשרי, העולם יהיה מקום הרבה יותר טוב. כאילו אנחנו נהיה בעתיד שונה לגמרי, וזה משהו שבאמת צריך להתחיל להתייחס אליו.
אחד הדברים שאישית לי הכי חשובים, ואני חושב שהם מאוד מאוד חשובים לעתיד שלנו, זה לדאוג לגיל המבוגר יותר, לדור השלישי, למי שהקים את המדינה. כי לפעמים אנחנו שוכחים אותם, ולפעמים אנחנו שוכחים מהמלחמות שלהם, מהבדידות שלהם, ולא מתייחסים להם, וזה אחד מהדברים הכי חשובים שצריך לעשות, כי בלעדיהם לא היינו פה, ובלעדיהם לא נהיה פה גם. איזשהו צד שאנחנו צריכים הרבה יותר להסתכל עליו, הרבה יותר לשים לב, בשביל שהעתיד שלנו יהיה טוב יותר. להסתכל יותר על העבר שלנו, בשביל להסתכל יותר על העתיד שלנו.
אני לא חושבת שיכולנו לסכם את זה יותר טוב עם המשפט הזה, כי בסוף הכל קשור להכל, העבר, להווה, לעתיד, ואני יכולה לסכם ולומר שאתם פשוט, באמת, מעוררי השראה. כל אחד ואחת מכם, מכל מקום שאתם מגיעים, היה לי מרתק, צריך לשמוע אתכם יותר. אני יודעת שאם שמעון פרס היה פה, הוא היה אומר לכם, תשמיעו את הקול שלכם יותר, תנצלו כל במה אפשרית כדי להוביל, להשפיע, לשנות. זה חלק מהצוואה שלו, כי הוא כל כך האמין בכל אחד ואחת מכם.
A lucky woman to have Shimon as my mentor. And in that process, we started Yala, and we got to work with Yuri Savir to start our online peace movement, where we had over 1 million young people online from all over the world. Young people helping young people through difficult situations. And in many cases, we were able to avoid conflict and save lives. All of this because of the incredible guidance of Shimon. I'm honored and privileged to have been a friend of Shimon Peres and to carry him forever in my heart.
I'm honored to be with you today to commemorate the life's work of President Shimon Peres. What I loved about Shimon is that he always urged us to aspire for something better, both individually and collectively. A message so important for all of us to remember in times like these. What an example he set for all of us. And how fantastic that the Peres Center for Peace and Innovation is continuing Shimon's vision. We need it now more than ever. And the light of his legacy will continue to shine as a beacon to the world. In Shimon's own words, if you want to be great, you must serve a great cause. There are many people with grandiose or authoritarian ambitions who plainly seek to only serve themselves. It is the leaders who serve something greater than themselves whom history will remember for their greatness.
דברים בשם המשפחה. אני מתכבד להזמין את הפרופסור צביה ציקי ולדן, ביתו הבכורה של הנשיא שמעון פרס.
ארבע שנים בלעדיו, וזה לא פשוט. אמנם לאבא שלנו היו שנים רבות וטובות כאן על פני אדמה, אבל עכשיו אנחנו, ולא רק אנחנו, מרגישים מאוד מאוד בחסרונו וזקוקים לו. כשאני מתגעגעת, אני נוצרת בעיקר רגעים נדירים שבהם כעס או התרגז, או רגעים שבהם היה נוסטלגי, כמובן, הס מלהזכיר לו, ונזכר בבית סבא ובזמירות שנהגו שם. הוא אהב במיוחד 3 פסוקים מפרק למד בתהילים. מי האיש החפץ חיים, אוהב ימים, אוהב ימים, לראות טוב. נצור לשונך מרע ושפתיך מדבר מרמה, סור מרע ועשה טוב, בא כשלום ורודפהו. שבת אחת החלטתי לשאול אותו למה בעצם הוא אוהב דווקא את המזמור הזה. הוא הסתכל עליי בפליאה ואמר, הניגון חשוב, אבל תקראי את הטקסט. אהבתי לשמוע את הפרשנויות שלו, להקשיב לו. כשהוא מכניע את הטקסט לרצונו, הוא מחפיף אותו למסר שהוא רצה לחלוק. מי האיש החפץ חיים? זה האיש אשר חפץ חיים, לפי הפרשנים המסורתיים, בעולם הבא, אוהב ימים לראות טוב. הוא יעשה עבודה טובה בעולם הזה. אבל לאבא שלנו הייתה פרשנות משלו, פרשנות המעוגנת בעולם הזה ולא בעולם הבא. הוא הסתכל עליי ואמר, האיש החפץ חיים זה אני, חיים של ממש, חיים של עשייה. אוהב ימים, הוא המשיך לחייך, זה גם אני, כי אני נהנה מכל יום ומכל פעולה. לראות טוב, הוא אמר, זה לראות למרחוק, לראות את הטוב שעוד יבוא. הוא היה אופטימיסט מפוכח, שידע מתי נכון לעצום עיניים, באהבה ובשלום, וגם מתי חשוב לפקוח אותן. בטוב שעוד יבוא, הוא כלל את המזרח התיכון החדש, את מדינת ישראל שנקנתה בדמים מרובים בתוך גבולותיה, אך בהקשר של המזרח התיכון כמרחב אדיר ופורץ גבולות. כבר 4 שנים שהוא רחוק. לא איתנו. יש אומרים בעולם הבא, אבל מורשתו נצורה בלבבות של רבים בעולם הזה, ורואה טוב. נצור לשונך מרע, הוא מזכיר לנו, ושפתיך מדבר מרמה, אל תתפתה לזייף את האמת. מורשתו היא מורשת של יושרה והגינות, מורשת המגלמת תרבות של קיום הבטחות, בכבוד לזולת באשר הוא, מורשת של שיח סובלני ומכיל, לא משסה ולא אלים, שיח של שלום שחייב להתנחל ולהתבסס בתוכנו. בקש שלום ורודפהו, הוא לא מרפא, ויחד איתו אנחנו נזכרים במסעותיו הנסתרים והגלויים שבהם רדף אחרי השלום. הוא שאף לשלום עם כולם, עם הקרובים והרחוקים, וכמובן עם השכנים. ולנגד עינינו צפים ועולים צילומים שלו מביקורים בארצות המפרץ, באומן וגם בקטר. 4 שנים בלעדיו. אבא שלנו ידע לרכוש את הערכתם ואת אמונם של גדולי עולם, כולל מנהיגים בעולם הערבי והמוסלמי. הוא נשאר נאמן לשליחות של מדינת ישראל להיות מדינת מופת, הן כלפי אזרחיה, הן כלפי האחרים. הוא האמין בטוב וחינך אותנו להמשיך לפעול ולקוות. הוא היה משוכנע שעתידנו תלוי בעיקרו של דבר בבחירות ובהחלטות שלנו, ביוזמות ובמעשים שלנו. אבא שלנו היה לא רק אופטימיסט מפוכח, אלא גם איש של עשייה, שהמשיך להיאבק על דמותה המוסרית של המדינה תוך הבטחת ביטחונה, על הסולידריות החברתית בה, על שלום מבית ומחוץ. ברוח המורשת שלו נישא מבט שוחר טוב ולעתיד, גם בימים קשים. אנחנו נמשיך להתגעגע ולהאמין, לסור מרע ולעשות טוב, לבקש שלום ולרודפהו.
את הסבא שלי, רייב הירש צבי מלצר, הערצתי הערצה עמוקה. כשנפרדתי ממנו על רציף הרכבת, קבע סבי את עתידי. תבטיח לי דבר אחד, אמר, תמיד תישאר יהודי. מרגע שהגעתי לאלומות השתוממתי. הייתי יכול להביט לכל כיוון ולראות דבר מה מופלא. הכנרת נוצצת בכל יופייה, נטיות צעירות שיצמחו להיות מטעי תמרים. בבת אחת הרגשתי שאני במרכז העולם. מאי 48, שם האונייה פליציה. צריך כ4 מיליון כסף מזומן, אספקה מיליון, ציוד מיליון, פגזים 25 פעם. לקבוצת אלומות שלום וברכה, חברים יקרים. מיניתי חבר שמעון פרס לסגן מנהל משרד הביטחון. ראו עבודתו של שמעון בביטחון כאחת מעבודות המשק והקבוצה. שלכם, דוד בן גוריון.
פרס, מנהל משרד הביטחון, חוזר מאנגליה לאחר רכישת שתי הצוללות.
הפתרון האמיתי לבעיית הביטחון הוא בהמצאת כלי נשק שאינם נמכרים בשוק, שאינם ניתנים לחיקוי, שיהיו מקור לעוצמה האמיתית שלנו בטווח הארוך. מכל המדינות המייצרות מטוסים, אנחנו המדינה הקטנה ביותר. לא רק גודל המדינה קובע, אלא גם רמתה הטכנולוגית.
ראש הממשלה מר דוד בן גוריון מסייר בכור האטומי הניסיוני הראשון.
מוניטין של כוח הוא כוח. התיאוריה שלי נגזרה מהאמירה זו. מוניטין גרעיני הוא כוח הרתעה. והרתעה, כך האמנתי, היא הצעד הראשון בדרך לשלום.
שרי הממשלה באו הבוקר לבניין הכנסת לישיבת ממשלה מיוחדת. השרים שמעו דיווחים על ההשתלשלות סביב המטוס החטוף באוגנדה.
שר הביטחון פרס, תנאי לפעולה לחלץ את החטופים. בלי זה אין טעם לכל המבצע. יצחק, השכלול האחרון בתכנון. במקום כלי רכב של השדה ירד מרצדס גדול פלוס דגלים. אינני יודע אם זה אפשרי, אבל מעניין.
עוד מעט עומדת להסתיים דרמה גדולה.
הטלוויזיה הישראלית מעריכה כי תוצאות הבחירות לכנסת התשיעית יהיו כדלקמן. מהפך שחל בפוליטיקה הישראלית. מחל ניצחה בבחירות, המערך נוסע.
עכשיו לתוצאות המדגם שלנו. תיקו.
פרס מגיע היום למחוז חפצו הפוליטי.
נכנסתי פנימה לבדי. המסדרון האפלולי, המדרגות לקומה השנייה, כל צעד הביא עמו גל של זיכרונות. כל ההתרגשות של המינוי לראש הממשלה, מכוניות השרד, הפמליה, לכל אלו לא הייתה משמעות עבורי. הפעם הראשונה שבה חשתי באמת כראש ממשלה הייתה כאשר ישבתי בכיסאו של הזקן.
יש לך פרפרים בבטן היום?
לא יודע מה זה פרפרים, יש לי דאגה בלב.
המשק על סף משבר, האינפלציה צוברת תאוצה.
או שאנחנו נתגבר על האינפלציה, או שהאינפלציה תרוס אותנו.
יש בירושלים למאזינים שלום רב.
במצב כזה העיקר זה להיות שקט, לראות דברים בבהירות. התחלנו לפעול כדי לצאת מהקטסטרופה הזאת.
הממשלה תתכנס מחר בלילה לישיבה מיוחדת שבה יאושר הסכם העקרונות הראשון בין ישראל לפלסטינים, הסכם שגובש בעת האחרונה במגעים עקיפים וישירים עם הנהגת אש"ף.
The Middle East, that is not a killing field, but a field of creativity and growth.
ממשלת ישראל מודיעה בתדהמה על מותו של ראש הממשלה ושר הביטחון יצחק רבין.
רבין ואני היינו יריבים נחרצים במשך עשרות בשנים, אבל הפכנו להיות שותפים קרובים בשנים האחרונות. שני אנשים הם יותר משניים, ואיש אחד הוא פחות מאחד. כשחזרתי למשרד ראש הממשלה, לא הייתי מסוגל לשבת בכיסא שלו.
140 אישים מכל העולם משתתפים בשעה זו בטקס הפתיחה החגיגי של מרכז פרס לשלום.
שום עניין פוליטיקאי ושום עניין אחר, אני משרת את השלום. לא חלמתי להיות נשיא. חלומי כנער היה להיות רועה צאן או משורר של כוכבים.
חברי הכנסת עסקנו הרבה בשטחים ולא מספיק במדע ובטכנולוגיה. המחשב בא במקום החרב. אין טעם שאדם ישפוך את דם רעהו כאשר אפשר להאריך את החיים. לפני 15 שנה חזרתי לוישניאבה, המקום שבו נולדתי. עמדתי דומע ליד קבר האחים של היהודים שנשרפו חיים. בראשם רייב צבי מלצר, סבי עליו השלום. לא רק יכולתי ללחוש באוזנם על עצמאותנו, לספר להם על צה"ל, על דימונה, על אנטבה, על הזכות הכבירה שניתנה לנכדם לצקת תוכן בשבועה שלעולם לא עוד.
אנחנו במשדר חדשות מיוחד, הנשיא לשעבר שמעון פרס.
שלום לכם, ישראל מתאבלת הבוקר על מותו של שמעון פרס שהלך הלילה לעולמו. נשיא המדינה התשיעי, ראש הממשלה, שר ביטחון, נדמה שאין תואר שלא נקשר בשמו, ובכל זאת.
אם אני מסתכל אחורה ואני שואל איזה שגיאה עשית בחייך, החלום שלי היה קטן מדי. אל תחסכו בחלומות. אל תפחדו, תחלמו תמיד וגדול.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the New Tomorrow Summit by IAC and the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation. I'm Noah Kolb, the head of the Technology and Startup Banking Group at IDB Bank, Discount New York. COVID-19 is affecting the world in many ways and is causing an enormous economic uncertainty and volatility. At our session today, Innovating Our Way Out from Obstacles to Opportunities, we will focus as much as possible on the bright side of this challenging period of time, and we will try to suggest ideas on how to find opportunities in difficult environments. Four of the most experienced figures in the Israeli-American tech ecosystem will be assisting us with our mission today, not an easy mission. Adi Sofer-Te'eni is the general manager of Facebook Israel. Jim Golovinsky is the general manager of Intuit Israel. Yaniv Garti, Intel Israel general manager, and Chemi Perez, the founder of Pitengo VC and the chairman of the board of the Paris Center of Peace and Innovation. Hello to all of you, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good afternoon. I would like to start at the more, I would say, personal angle. You're all accomplished, successful, and experienced leader, but I would like your personal take on this situation. How did COVID-19 affected your lives and the way you look at the world we live in? Let's start with you, Adi.
Maybe I'll start by saying that, first of all, amazing to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
That's a great start.
And I think that the first thing is that, you know, everyone in my family and close to me are all healthy. So obviously, when talking about, you know, personal experience during this time, I'm privileged to be in a position that I can talk about the non-health related impact. And the most important one was a lesson in humbleness. And there are probably two main things here. The first lesson in humbleness was that this period has shown us the power of nature. I don't know about you, but this is, you know, I was sitting at home and feeling powerless, and how powerless we all are in the face of this pandemic. It doesn't matter who you are for the first time, where you're from, if you are rich or poor, if you have a master's degree or you didn't finish school. All of us all over the world experience this together. So one lesson in humbleness. And then the second one, which actually keeps me awake at night, was the realization that there are so many things we do in a certain way just because we are used to it. And that has developed a sort of a limit to the way we think, to the way we do things. You know, we are used to living our lives in a certain way, buying groceries in a certain way, working in a certain way, meeting friends in a certain way, spending time with the family in a certain way. And all of a sudden, we couldn't do those things anymore. We had to get very creative. And I believe all of us initially thought that this is going to be a terrible experience. Our whole life, like, suddenly turning upside down, at least mine, and we can't go to the office anymore and see our parents and all of those things. But during this period and these past few months, I've realized for the first time how much our habits are almost like a prison. It was like...
Okay, Chemi, what's your take?
First of all, great words. I share what Adi said. I'll make maybe a few additional comments. First of all, I'll say that the first thing I sensed is how fragile the world is when a virus, which is invisible, really causes so much trouble, so much fear and despair around the world. Personally, I felt very lucky because our business and our activities have managed to continue, and even some parts of it in a higher rate of success. And I was at home, safe, and I felt that I'm lucky that I'm part of the technology ecosystem. I was also inspired by the global collaboration, coordination, and cooperation. There's been, of course, some little wars about protection measures like masks, like nose swabs, like ventilators. But in general, seeing the collaboration around the world, the race to find a vaccination, drugs, and diagnostics has been quite inspiring. I was also inspired by the way our companies reacted and responded immediately They took measures to protect their people, to protect their business, and very quickly turned into looking for the opportunities.
Chemi, we're going to speak about the professional points in a little bit. Yaniv, how did COVID-19 affected your life and the way you look at the world in a non-professional way?
So I was at home. Sorry, you're talking to Yaniv. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. And just a couple of additions. I think kind of it might sound cynical, but on a personal level, I'm still searching for the fast forward button to get away from 2020. I think all of us have experienced some of the longest weeks of our lives during the last few months. I think we are all witnessing a historical moment or a period, because this is a crisis which is not only deep but also very wide. And I think one of the lessons I can add to what Adi and Chemi mentioned is the being able to get to a sense of clarity, clarity of purpose, the clarity of action, and how we use that both on our personal lives and our professional lives.
Jean, you were in the U.S. at the point where, due to the corona, you weren't able to fly to Israel. And you ran the company from where you were, the U.S. And at first hand, you can tell us, does it really matter where you are?
Well, I'm still in California, right? I'm on the West Coast time zone. And when I moved to Israel to run into the Israel Development Center in Tel Aviv in 2019, the plan was all along that I will make often trips between Tel Aviv and San Francisco, Mountain View headquarters. When I came here into California in March, little that I know that I'll probably stuck here for 4 to 5 months now. So I think global pandemic blurred geographical boundaries, although we decided to keep the time zones. And the situation when everybody is working from home, it doesn't really matter that much where the home is, as long as you stay connected to the company, to your employees. But it is an interesting point, though, with everybody in the tech industry, or almost everybody in the tech industry, working from home and trying to work from home. What do you do about the company culture? How do you preserve company culture? How do you hire and absorb new employees? How they, by osmosis, adopt the company culture? Company culture is not just driven by the physical space, although that's a big part of it, but it's also a common mission, and ours is power and prosperity around the world. And people are so used to, at this point, people are so used to interacting in certain ways. The proverbial water cooler conversation is no longer possible. Swinging by somebody's desk and having a quick chat is no longer possible. So we had to figure out what to do about it, how to stay present while being absent. This is my challenge. And, to a degree, I believe in the very virtualized and even more so virtualized world. It means and matters less and less where you are physically, as long as you're connected. And that's what modern technology allows all of us to do, to stay connected. But the lives are upside down for everyone. There's no question about it.
Yaniv, Intel has more than 13 employees in Israel. How does a company with so many employees work and function remotely?
I think you meant 13,000.
13,000.
Yeah, quite a bunch. I mentioned before clarity of purpose and action. I think for us, immediately after all of this started, it boiled down to two things: ensure the safety and well-being of our employees and their families, and ensuring business continuity with an eye on our customer needs. We didn't turn off the lights at any of our sites in Israel at any time. There are certain things that we cannot do remotely. We have a big advanced manufacturing site. People need to be there. We have design and engineering labs. We have data centers. So there have been more than a few, quite a big number of employees that went to on site daily. But we still had the majority of employees working from home. It helped us with those on site to kind of space things and keep their safety. And for those working from home, in many ways, working from home is not something which is foreign to us. We have started enabling that to those who can do their job remotely about a decade ago. And we're a global company, like the other companies. We have all the tools. We have video conferencing and all of that. But it goes way beyond that. It's the how you make sure that people are feeling emotionally safe. How do they feel that there is stability? Things like making sure that we don't have any of our employees, but and also our subcontractors being laid off during the pandemic. Helping people financially with things like babysitters and things like that. All the way to taking more of a focus on the emotional side of things, how you manage remotely, how you create a team culture like Jean mentioned before. And all of that is also leading to driving the business continuity. At the end of the day, we're a business. We reported a very strong Q1. We also had an outlook for Q2. Here in Israel, we met all of our targets, which also has a very positive impact on the Israeli financial indicators, because it helps on exports indicators, GDP. Last year, we have been about 1.6% of the GDP of Israel, and also the employment rates. So all of that together, kind of the two kind of are basically tied together, weaved together. But these were the two things that we were focusing on throughout the time.
Adi, it seems like Facebook has a crucial role, more than ever, allowing people to stay connected. Are there any changes in the way you work and do things because of COVID-19?
So first of all, like similar to what Yaniv said, and probably even easier for us being a software company working from home, was something that we relatively adopted too fast. At the same time, it creates a lot of challenges on culture and how to brainstorm and be creative together. I think that there were three top of minds. One is obviously making sure that our platforms are being used in, the right way, and connecting people was more important than ever. So a lot of focus on that with massive increase in volume across the board. Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, Live that was used by so many, like the discussion we have right now, but artists, journalists, so supporting politicians, supporting all of them. Launching a new product was a focus on new products in general, but video rooms around connectivity was the top of mind. So thinking about the new products or moving fast in releasing features and products was very important to us. Then another pillar was to make sure that information is being shared properly. We were searching for the right information every day. I think that we were all becoming addict of data. And we built an information center, which is basically available to everyone every day on their feed, and 2 billion people used it. Focusing on how to do that and how to work with the health organization globally was important, but also to make sure that we take misinformation outside of the platform in a very consistent and fast way. And then the last one would be figuring out how Facebook can be used to help in the economic recovery, especially with small businesses, with a pledge of $100 million. And in Israel, we actually have a really cool project. We work with all the tech companies, including Wix and Fiverr and many of the startups, to try to help small businesses recover fast. So I think these were like the top of mind for us during this period. And of course, culture and work from home.
Jean, how did you in Intuit kept the positive can-do attitude and stayed innovative during this crisis?
That's a great question. Initially, when this whole work from home started and people were trying to figure out how to adapt, we actually expect a drop in productivity for engineering teams. And in Israel, we're just pure engineering team. We even had a conversation, how do we do replanning? Can we keep all of our deliverables? Not one team did the replanning and delivered on time just about all the obligations that they're committed before the pandemic started. That was just purely amazing. The company itself made sure that employees are most productive at home. And that goes from supplying large screens and ergonomic keyboards and ergonomic chairs to the employees that need that, upgrading broadband connectivity for those that needed that. And even more so, in a very few weeks, we launched 3 new offerings that are related to the recovery plan. That's Intuit Aid Assist, their free website, an interactive tool to help businesses, small business owners and employees, and the individual consumers to understand how much and what they're eligible from the CARES Act that Congress has adopted. QuickBooks Capital is non-bank approved lender that allows paycheck protection program that you can register through and get the loan through QuickBooks, which is obviously done in minutes. And TurboTax stimulus registration, as many of you know, people that receive stimulus check from the government receive it faster if they actually have an electronic record with IRS. So even if people never filed taxes through TurboTax, they could do that now for free, just to have the record, and they have their stimulus check deposited quite immediately. I mentioned before that the low-run companies, people are kind of galvanized by the common mission, and ours is power and prosperity around the world. People really felt the sense of purpose, and engineers felt the sense of purpose. It's no secret to anybody, small businesses are suffering. The unemployment all over the world is very high. I think the sense of gratitude and obligation that Intuit employees can help others stimulated quite a bit of creativity and adaptivity across the board, from US to Israel.
Chemi, how do you and Pitango do business these days? Do you look at companies and investment opportunities differently than before? Probably yes, but your take is interesting.
The second answer is yes, of course, we do business in a different way. But how do we do business first? I think that we learned that things that we started before COVID-19 was very easy to continue. We closed the fundraising. We sold a couple of companies. One of them was announced today. We closed some rounds of funding. So it's easy to work on Zoom and emails when you are continuing a process. It's harder to start new things, and Zoom does not allow you really a good judgment of people when you want to recruit people, or to look at a young company when you don't have a sense of the founding team. It has to be physical at the end of the day. There's also, we miss the fact that in real life, you are near people, and sometimes you are in a certain area and they tell you should meet this guy, you should talk to that guy, and opportunities are created. You cannot do it on Zoom. As for the kind of companies, first question in a company is, will they survive the next COVID-19, maybe COVID-20, who knows, 21? Will they be able to be resilient and productive and cross the pandemic or the plague or the crisis, whatever it will be? We discovered that the world is divided to a physical part and a digital part, and your business model needs to be adapted to both spheres. So when one thing goes down, you can still run your business on the other one. And bear in mind, in this crisis, the physical side was shut down, the digital side was open, but tomorrow we can experience something different, where a cyber attack, we shut down all our digital aims and we'll have to work manually. So fragility of companies is becoming critical when we look at a new investment opportunity.
We're looking at an industry shift these days on hot trends that are cooling down while new stars are shining. Adi, which sector do you think will be dominant and fast growing from now on?
So at the beginning, we were trying to look at the industries, especially on the tech and startups, which are our focus in Israel. And we were trying to assess what would the future look like for them. And we built a kind of a 2x2 model. So imagine like the horizontal line represent the company's financial resilience, how much money they have in the bank, of course, but also strong business model, strong unit economics, etc. And obviously companies that enter this crisis with a stronger economical resilience will survive better regardless of the industry. But the second one, or the vertical line, represent what we call a situation market fit. So not product market fit, but situation market fit for product and services that are relevant today and in the coming, few months and few years. And then few verticals comes to mind. I'll just share, I think that B2B SaaS, and especially companies that rely on an online funnel rather than face-to-face and long-term sales processes are super interesting, and Monday.com is a great example for that in Israel. But also consumer tech startups like JoyTunes and Lightrix and many, many others that have a very strong situation market fit, not only saw an amazing acceleration during these last 2 months, but I think that have a very strong coming few years ahead of them.
Jean, what's your take? What stars are we going to be shining the next few years?
Even before COVID and the global pandemic, the world was becoming, and rapidly so, more and more virtualized. We were using virtual presence devices, video conferencing and all of that. A few years ago, we actually made a bet on digitizing service industry. And even more now than before, it is clear that the bet is correct. Just imagine that you need to file taxes. That's what we do. We help people to file taxes. And you can actually enjoy the consult of the professional accountant through TurboTax Live. That doesn't necessarily require for you to go to a brick and mortar store and to talk to the person face to face. That person can reside anywhere on the planet. The same applies to QuickBooks Live. You can connect to the accountant and to get a professional advice how to organize your books. Digital payments experiencing quite a bit of growth. It was growing already, it's now even more so. So it's pretty apparent that with this pandemic or another pandemic may be coming, people will prefer to do as much as possible virtually, and having ability to enable people to do so safely, effectively, and reliably is becoming not just a trend, but a necessity. It's not a fashion anymore. If you watch CNBC Mad Money, that they will tell you there are some companies that were tailored for pandemic, and there are some companies that succeed quite immensely during this time because of the ability to enable virtual collaboration and virtual communication. That is not to say that it doesn't open additional problems with the cybersecurity, as Henry mentioned. We have to be very watchful about that, but it is an opportunity for both cybersecurity and AI to do better and to enable more reliable and more usable virtual experiences for people and businesses.
Thank you, Jean. Chemi, what's your estimation? Who are going to be the shining stars, and who, unfortunately, we will be, what trends and what sectors we're going to be seeing cooling down?
So the first two observations is that, first of all, the world got a push in the back towards technology and innovation. People use technology like they never did before, and I would assume probably a decade ahead. That happened in distance learning, in digital health, in other areas. So first, I would say everything that relates to data. Most of our companies are actually building their exit strategy with data. It's data-driven exit and monitoring of the situation. So those who will contribute to the connectivity to the digital network will probably be very strong. Another area is digital health. I think whatever we can do outside of hospitals and outside of physical touch will flourish, and we see tremendous growth in our healthcare companies. Cybersecurity for sure, because we saw what happened when Iran and Israel exchanged some cyber attacks during COVID. And you need to remember that when you have a global crisis, it should not stay only in one dimension. There will be other dimensions. It's healthcare, it's economic, it's cybersecurity, and maybe others will come in. So I think that those are the three areas that I would say would benefit from the crisis. And of course, there will be others. And I think that to add to that, I think is the new business models that will arise, companies that will be able to address, as Adi said, the situation product fit will also benefit.
Thank you, Chemi. Yaniv, your take is that not everything is Corona, and that companies should focus also on field and solutions and services that are not Corona related. Can you explain more about this opinion of yours?
Yeah, first of all, definitely Corona and the pandemic are top of mind in terms of personal safety. But when we look at where we are today, a minute before it all started, we were still part of a journey which is a technological revolution, which was centered around data. We are a known brand, but probably people who are not aware of the fact that under the hood of many of the things we do online and virtual, there are computing or AI or cyber or networking solutions that we are dealing with. We also are kind of famous for Moore's Law, and Moore's Law also applies for data. We are seeing that the amount of data the humanity produces doubles every 18 months. So every 18 months we produce the same amount of data as the rest of history for humankind. But what's also interesting about that is up until lately, we have been using only about, and depends on which research you look at, 3, 4, 5, 6% of that. I think what we have seen during Corona is an uptake, an acceleration of the usage of data in different domains, different activities, distance learning, online services, ordering food, distance medicine, and I think Adi mentioned about a shop owner and how they now manage their supply chain management and customer base. So there is going to be, in our opinion, not only an increase in the amount of data, but also the ability to actually use the data and drive new services out of it.
I would like to speak now about the long-term effect of COVID-19 on innovation, technology, and Yaniv, you acquired Movit a month ago for $1 billion. Do you expect acquisitions, deals like this, to be less common from now on, at least in the near to medium future?
I think there's a great session right after us of Ev and Neil are going to talk about, I think you dubbed it as acquisition in flip-flops or something like that. So they're going to talk more in details about the Movit acquisition. And we are very happy. It's if I didn't lose my math, it's the 19th acquisition that Intel has made here in Israel. So it's definitely something we're proud of. We have two main kind of arms which are kind of working together with the innovation ecosystem or the startups. One is Intel Capital. The other one is a growth program that we call Ignite. We do see that Intel Capital continues to invest. They've announced about a month ago investing $132 million in about 11 companies. So that's a good pace. But we do see, and that's from dealing with early stage startups in a growth accelerator, that if up until COVID broke, for those great companies, money was probably, funding was probably not part of the top 5 things they had on their list. It became, right now, money is listed on all 1 to 5. And definitely, it's time, those times changed. I think we'll continue to see acquisitions, we'll continue to see investments. There is a delay with some of those. I see programs coming out of, specifically in Israel, from the Israel Innovation Authority. I think it's critical to help bridging funding for startups, because they are not accustomed to use the banking system for money. And we do see, when we started our second round of the accelerator and we went all virtual, we were concerned about the engagement of people. But how silly it may sound, actually the fact that people are not traveling helped quite a bit. So many investments and acquisitions are based on personal relationship, and I think people are starting to find ways to create and build those bridges. Even if you do that virtually, it takes more time, it is done differently. But once those are established, the rest can follow.
Chemi, we're seeing major decline in investment at startups the past few months. How do VCs and investors operate, and what's the likelihood of a startup to raise capital these days?
So thank you for the question. We have multiple funds which are focused on early stage and growth. On the early stage side, those companies that are now raising money and they are aiming towards what we call the new normal are extremely attractive, and we know that they're going to develop their products and launch them either in 2021 or 2022. So that is, in my mind, a no-brainer. You find a great team and you invest in that team, and you know that the milestone will bridge over the next 18 to 24 months. That's a no-brainer. With regards to the growing companies, many companies are now growing faster, and actually they enjoy the excessive demand because of the crisis. And I think these companies are now raising additional funds in order to extend their runway, another opportunity for us to participate in companies that either we missed or by the time we wanted to invest, it was a little bit too expensive, but they made a way, and we're looking at both sides. I think it's more challenging for those companies that are young, have not yet attracted enough interest from customers nor from investors. They have a short runway. They will be challenged by their ability to raise money, primarily because of the reason that, you know, in Israel we don't sense it, but the US is going to enter a terrible global financial crisis, and that is the thing that worries me most than anything else. So these companies will not be able to make it, unfortunately. But still, I think that the level of innovation, the ability of Israeli companies to pivot and to adapt to the new change, and this is the subject matter of this discussion, is really outstanding. The creativity, the ability to turn around on a coin is extremely interesting. And I can tell you from looking at our portfolio, we had, thank God, none of our companies really was hit in a way that is irrecoverable.
For entrepreneurs and founders that are watching us right now, what is the way to break out of the mentality of self-preservation into the mode of seeking opportunities, or if to use the cliche, how to turn lemons into lemonades? Adi, let's start with you.
Cool. Maybe just to refer to what Chavi said, and I think that early stage startups may see some challenges in the coming period, and we talked to many of them. However, it's also an opportunity, and you see those VCs that understand that it's going to be an opportunity period to find an amazing companies to invest in. So I think that there's also a lemonade even for early stage startups. And to your question about entrepreneurs in the room, so the first thing I would say is that they can teach all of us how to adapt fast. You know, probably these entrepreneurs knows better than anyone on this panel how to actually do that. But few things maybe to keep in mind. One is that many people mistakenly, and that's also true in big companies, think that in crisis mode companies needs to centralize more and, you know, centralize everything, decision, resources. I actually think that it's exactly the opposite. I think that in crisis mode you need to decentralize as much as possible and give small teams the ability to move fast and adjust. There's actually a Harvard Business Review article that is really strong, you know, creating a really strong argument around that. So that's one. The second thing that is very relevant to startups is that balance between long-term and short-term bets. And it's time for shorter-term bets. So it's like move fast, move even faster. And the way I see it right now, and also in the last 2 months working with many startups, many of these quick wins or short-term opportunities can actually present a really cool long-term bet for the company. But move fast on product, on launching, on looking at the data and reacting to it, whether it's geography opportunities or audiences opportunities or product. And then the last one would be, or maybe two. One is to capitalize. It's time to capitalize on strong talent and culture. I think everyone said it before. And entrepreneurs that really are figuring out how to do that, how to bring their culture to life, and how to capitalize on the talent they've hired right now more than ever would be more successful. And the last, for me, is one that is a bit more emotional, and it's for me, it's like trying to imagine how everything would look like when this crisis will be over. And imagine ourselves at that, end line, and we look back, and are we proud in the way we showed up, in the way we showed up with our employees, in the way we showed up with our investors, in the way we showed up with our clients and customers, and not less important, in the way we showed up with our families. So the hindsight and look back perspective, I think, is one I would think of every minute of every day.
Yaniv, what's the way to do it? You have long experience as a senior manager and executive. How do you leave this mentality of self-preservation and move into the mode of seeking opportunities and being innovative and creative?
If you'll allow me to bore you with a bit of a sports analogy.
Okay.
If you look back at history, humanity did go through some major crises before, whether other plagues or wars. Humanity always excelled afterwards. I think there are huge opportunities, whether it's startups or medium-sized companies or big companies. But in order to do so, you cannot take your team off the field. You cannot just play defense. You have to have the right mix of defense and offense, but also be looking all the time whether the rules of the games are changing on you. So you have to listen, which means you have to look for opportunities and adapt to the mix of type of players you have on the field. So again, for the basic analogy, it all drives at the end. Those who can change, those who can adapt, those who can understand their assets, those who play offense while others may play defense, go to a saying which I kind of find quite important these times, of Andy Grove, which was one of our founders. He said that at times of crisis, weak companies are being destroyed. Good companies will survive, but great companies will improve, will excel. And I think those who will be quick on strategy, play the defense, but have always the offense team on the field, those will excel and thrive after this.
We have to really finish in 2 minutes. Jean, what's your take? And I understand that you believe that large corporations, they have a role in helping small and medium companies, especially at these times.
Without a doubt. And I think one of the most dangerous things is to say business as usual. There's nothing usual about the business right now. And I think if you're actually trying to pretend that there's business as usual, they're doing the service to you, to your employees, and to your customers. I think Adi, you mentioned, maybe, and everybody had quite a bit of wisdom to share. But how you show up to your customers, how you're reaching out to your customers, how you're helping your customers, and we're into it as in business of helping small businesses, right? Small businesses are the most impacted right now. How we're helping them, how we're standing up for them is fundamentally how we succeed. Their success is our success, without a question. And we've been very thoughtful in understanding how we make the most based on our experiences, how to help to get to the financial resources that they need. There is one more thing, is that the whole pandemic kind of showed to us that we can be productive working from home. It doesn't mean that we have to abandon our offices, but it does mean that we can and should rethink how we approach our office space, how we approach competition for talent. In many ways, competition for talent is very brutal, and in many cases, we just kind of now would be able to allow for people to work remotely while becoming part of our family. So if you want, we would think about the hubs of talent, right? That's the Tel Aviv hub, that's the Bay Area hub, and so on.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Our wonderful panelists for today, Adi Sofer Teani, the General Manager of Facebook Israel, Jim Golovinsky, the General Manager of Intuit Israel, Yaniv Garti, Intel Israel General Manager, and Chemi Perez, Managing General Manager of Pitango VC and the Chairman of the Board of the Center, the Paris Center for Peace of Innovation. I'm Noah Kolb, the head of the Technology and Startup Banking Group at IDB Bank, Discount New York. Thank you all for joining us today at The New Tomorrow. Good luck and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The New Tomorrow, Accept, Adapt, and Switch. If anyone thought about the meaning of New Tomorrow a few months ago, it would have had an entirely different meaning than what it has today. We are more interconnected than ever with this new reality we were forced into. And to help us understand what it is we have experienced collectively and individually in the past 3 months, I am pleased to introduce our incredible experts, 2 individuals who have dedicated their lives to understanding the human psyche. With us today are Professor Yoram Yovel, a highly respected psychiatrist, brain researcher, psychoanalyst, TV presenter, author, and international keynote speaker. Many of you know him from his primetime show, Sichat Nefesh, Heart to Heart Talk, which he hosted for 10 years, an award-winning interview program on Israeli TV where he interviewed politicians, writers, and artists about the relationship between their lives and their work. Yovel is also a best-selling author. His books deal with how science may account for some of the puzzling, seemingly illogical workings of human mind. Brainstorm, published in 2001, and What is Love, published in 2004. I'm also delighted to introduce Dan Ariely, a James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at Duke University. Professor Ariely is a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight, co-creator of the documentary film Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies.
Wait. You didn't give it enough pause, please. The Center for Advanced Hindsight. That's a funny name. You need to stop after that. I'm joking. Go ahead.
Professor Ariely is a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight.
Very good.
Pause. Co-creator of the documentary film Dishonesty, The Truth About Lies, and a 3-time New York Times best-selling author. His books include Predictability, Irrational, The Upside of Irrationality, The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, Irrationally Yours, and Payoff. And in 2013, Bloomberg recognized Dan as one of the top 50 most influential thinkers. He also has a bi-weekly advice column in the Wall Street Journal called Ask Ariely. Welcome, gentlemen. It's a pleasure having you here with us.
Lovely to be here.
Likewise.
I'll start with a question that I'm going to direct to both of you. And I'd like to know, let's kind of set the tone. How would you describe what we all just went through and are still going through, some of us, maybe in Israel a little less, both collectively and personally, from a psychological and mental standpoint? Professor Ariely, let's begin with you. I know you've been studying the ramifications of COVID-19 and conducting quite extensive research.
First of all, thank you. I didn't mean to throw you off. So maybe as a quick introduction, I'll just say that I'm a part of a small company that works with the government here in Israel. And during the COVID-19 period, we were involved in many things. We were involved in how to give instructions in a way that people could understand and follow, How do we think about the education school? What do we do with prisoners? What do we do with domestic violence? How do we put money back into the economy? How do we get mayors to collaborate? So lots of things. But if we ask about the psychology of this event, it's actually a very, very complex event with lots of things going on. I think there's lots of questions about trust between individuals and the government. I think there are questions about what's called public good. How do we think and act collectively? And of course, there's the aspect of stress. And then the economy and so on. So just to focus on one of them, maybe I'll say something about collective good. And there are other aspects, of course. If you think about something like taxes, taxes are collective good. So if 10% of the people don't pay their taxes, that's a bad thing, and we have 10% less tax. In COVID-19, if 10% of the people don't adhere to the instructions and they run around, it's not just 10% less, it can ruin it for everybody. If we try to do some kind of distancing and 10% of the people don't adhere, much of the distances is useless. And if you think about it, what it means is that if we work together as a country, then everybody gets to benefit. And if we don't, even a small minority can destroy it for everybody. And we started this period with a very high collective action. Not perfect, and we had some challenges with minorities, but we did very well with collective action. That collective action has stopped. Very sadly, if you look at what's happening in the last few days, it's true that the numbers are going down, but my fear is that this sense of commitment to the collective good has gone down, and the commitment to a collective good is things like wearing masks, right? When you do it for other people more than yourself, and I'm very, very proud of the collective action we had early on. It's really kind of amazing and heartwarming. I'm a little worried about the reduction over time, and of course it links to trust and other things. So that's the beginning comment.
So collective action that dwindled once the crisis is over, or at least seems to be over.
I think the dwindling actually started when Netanyahu and Rivlin violated social distancing or distancing. So it wasn't the objective reality of where the distance was. It was about trust, and it was also about some anger about the way the economy was opening.
Interesting, which we saw here in the States as well, when you saw leaders who weren't practicing what different governors and the administration were preaching. That definitely created that sense of distrust. Yoram, how would you see these 3 months, what it means, where we're at, summarize the craziness?
Yeah. So first of all, I think perfect hindsight is indeed always perfect. So I think it's much easier to talk about things from right now. I agree with everything that Dan said. I think the question about is this a trauma and are we traumatized? I would say the answer is yes. I think that all the variables, both on a national level here in Israel as well as in the US, and the personal responses of most people, what you see in the media and social networks, yes, we have been traumatized. But I would say that this is a special form of trauma, something that we have not experienced before. And I think fear of the unexpected or concern about the unexpected can put you off guard for a long time, and as things are changing. So I think for all of us, this has been travel through uncharted territory. And then issues of social cohesiveness and trust, as Dan said, play paramount importance in both the adherence to the government's instructions and in terms of the national morale, how people respond. Do people feel protected and taken care of? Do they feel like the burden is evenly distributed? Do they feel like the right people are making the right decisions, etc.? One caveat about looking back is that the models that we have in psychology and psychiatry about looking at those events on a personal level, and then we infer from that on a national level, is the syndrome known as post-traumatic stress disorder. But that syndrome implies that there has been a trauma and now it's over, and we keep returning back to what has been traumatized, what happened to us before. And I think the difference here, and I think you feel it in the States as well, is that this is not post-trauma. This is trauma. We're still in it, and we're not. It's not like World War II, if you will, of the Vietnam War was traumatic. But now the war is over, and some people, most people, just carry on. And then there's a group of people who keep going back. I think that here we're still in the midst of it, and it's going to take quite some time until it's over. As Dan said, the ramifications are everywhere, from advanced technology like the software that we're using to make this very conference possible, and their distribution. To the rise of food, food delivery all over from restaurants that can't be open, all the way to scientific discoveries, transportation, you name it, the economy, of course, and what it did to people. So I think I'd like to concentrate on it's still broad as it is, the psychology of what has been going on. And I would agree with Dan that a very critical issue is the issue of trust, and I will also add to it the issue of fear. I think that with the rationale that here lack of adherence to the social distancing regulations by even a small minority of the population could set off a chain reaction and prevent adequate control of the pandemic. I think that we've been systematically and persistently frightened by ominous statements by politicians, by officials, not so much, I have to say, by practicing physicians, but people who've been officials in the Ministry of Health here. And I think in the States too, the music from the White House went from absolute lackadaisical, there's nothing in it, it's just a little bit of flu, what's the big deal, to we're in this national crisis, it's terrible, I don't know how to stop it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that there's an upside and a downside to scaring people so much.
Sure, and there was definitely a lot of criticism where that came from. Now, you mentioned fear, and fear being enhanced when there's something unexpected, like the pandemic that we're experiencing still. Dana, really, in one of your webinars, you said that every time we experience something and don't encounter a negative outcome, then we're getting the wrong impression that it's safer than what we thought it was, which kind of pertains to what Yoram was saying. So I'm guessing you were, of course, referring to the pandemic. And do you think this is a human trait, or is this something we can somehow maneuver?
Yeah, so both. Before I move to your question, I want to add one small thing to Yoram. It turns out that people have a tremendous amount of resilience. But one of the things that helps with resilience is knowing what is going to happen, right? If you tell me you're going to get a shock, and then you might get fired, and then there'll be 3 weeks, and we have a plan, we can suffer the pain. Not knowing creates what we call learned helplessness, makes things very, very hard to control. And again, it's not about the absolute level of pain, it's about not knowing where bad things are happening. And that's really, really tough. If you walk around the world and bad things are happening to you without you knowing, that's a very, very tough. it's also
not
interesting.
knowing, or are you talking about information not being properly conveyed, or maybe both?
Not expecting. I would say
That's
not
right.
expecting,
No.
not anticipating, you know.
Yeah, and it could come from we don't really know, and it could come because of not being conveyed. So if I tell you, Michal, I'll tell you tomorrow what the plan is, and tomorrow I say, I'll tell you tomorrow what it is, that's very different than say, I have a plan for the next 2 weeks, we might change it, but here is how it's going. So there are different types of stress. By the way, this kind of stress, that not knowing, also has a bad effect on the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's one thing. So it's stress and fear and trauma, and the not knowing where it's coming from is adding to that. Now, in terms of your question, kind of one of the ways that we learn is by experience and not from description. There's an amazing amount of work on this by Ido Erev, a professor in the Technion. And think about something like texting and driving. If you remember the old days, when you text and drive, let's say you think the probability of texting and driving and something bad happen is 1%. So one day you do it, and nothing bad happened, the probability is 1%. In your mind, you change the probability. You say, oh, nothing happened. Maybe it's 0.75%. And then you do it again and again and again. Low probability events, when we engage in them, we learn the wrong lesson. Now, what's happening with COVID-19? If you think about period 1, closure, high level of fear, and a certain level of risk, but the fear is higher than the risk. And then the disease is going down. And some people would adjust and some people would stay. But the fear the question is, what will get the fear to go down as well? And the same thing we mentioned with the feedback from texting and driving is going to help here. So imagine two people. Imagine one person who says, okay, they tell us that we can go out, but I'm going to wait another month. Versus imagine another person that says, I'm going to go out just a little bit. The person that will go out a little bit would go out, nothing bad will happen to them. The probability is very low in the second period. Odds are that nothing bad will happen. And they'll say, no, it's not so bad. So for example, my research lab at Duke, my plan is to ask people to show back up to work, but even for 1 hour a day. Like you could say, oh, let's let people stay at home if they're stressed, but that stress will not go down.
But then the question is, how do you maintain the same behavior? Lower the stress, but maintain the responsible behavior.
Yeah, and that needs to come from social cohesion and caring about others. You know, so for example, we still have a tremendous stress, a pressure to shake people's hands. Like if we met and I would come to you with my hand out, you would have a very hard time not shaking my hand, right? You could give me an elbow. Like the elbow is helpful because you show an action, but otherwise, if you did that, please don't. It would be really tough, right? It's so aggressive. If I came for a hug, actually, we should do some experiments on this and see how people react. But I think that keeping it, we need experience, and we need to create a new norm for a while. We need to do reminders about washing hands. We need all kinds of tricks, but we do need them. The reality is that in Israel right now, numbers are very low. Distancing, mask, washing hands, it looks like we're fine, right? But of course, and no large gatherings. That's a dangerous thing. But if we want society to come back to normal, we have to go out. Now, one other point is that one of the things that we're recommending now to cities around Israel is to create institutions for this Corona period 2, we call it. Corona period 1, we were locked. Corona period 2, we're trying to get out. So what are the odds that I will go right now to a very busy coffee shop or restaurant? Very, very low. So we're asking mayors to allow restaurants to expand from the restaurant to the sidewalk and even to take a few parking spots. Because if the distance is very high, there's a chance people would sit. big distance. But if they'll do it 2 or 3 times for 2 or 3 weeks, then we could, go back from the sidewalk into it. We need the experience that would teach us that things are safe. And for some things, it will be easier, like supermarkets and coffee shops. For some things, like movie theaters, it's going to be much more complex.
Although you are seeing, at least I know here at Central Park, people aren't maintaining social distancing, and it's not scaring people away. There are certain parks that have kind of created different pods for people to know where they can sit and where is safe and to utilize the space. But it's interesting that you're actually looking at people's fears rather than the limitations that need to be at hand. But Yoram, I saw an interview of yours on Channel 12 where you're talking about people's stress level and how pretty much people have had many questions, and understanding the stress is kind of the first way to deal with it. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, but also tell us how come in Israel, where things are starting to open up, it seems like a lot of people very quickly forgot that COVID even happened. Like, is this our mind playing tricks on us?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think there are 2 issues here. I think one is what Dan has been talking about, which is how do you desensitize people to something that was very frightening beforehand? How do you get them to go past their anxieties about it? But the other one is the issue of trust. I would agree with Dan that the trust of the population here in the authorities, in the Ministry of Health, certainly, has been violated. People feel like they've been scared, that there were cries of wolf, wolf, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. And for the vast majority of the people, nothing bad happened. And I think that there's a reaction to that. Once people feel like they've been fooled or they've been frightened by something that really isn't so scary, or even worse, if they suspect an ulterior motive, to those scares, then they're going to rebound. Then they'll say, "Oh yeah, well let's do that." I also think that the forces that draw us together, like shaking hands, like hugging, like gathering together, congregations congregate, and societies socialize. People get together. That's what we're about. We're strongly wired to do that. So I think the prohibitions against that would be temporary. And again, I think it's very much an issue of people following instructions if they feel like the norms are just that the instructions have been rational. And I think the issue of trust is really paramount there, because I'll give an example from something that anyone who's a practitioner or a clinician doesn't like. The issue of malpractice. When do people sue their caregivers, their caretakers? It's not when they've made a mistake. I think people can be very forgiving if they feel like their doctor has made a mistake, but the doctor did their best, and at the time they made the right decisions, what would appear to be the right decisions, but there was a bad outcome, or even that the doctor tried very hard, that they did their best, people would tend to be very forgiving. The point where people sue their caregivers is when they feel like the doctor's been negligent, or worse, arrogant, or dismissing some concerns that were raised. That's when they get vindictive.
There's also some results.
Yeah.
There's also some result to support Yoram's statement that when physicians apologize for the mistakes, lawsuits go down. And it's kind of interesting because lawyers never want the doctor to admit, right? Let's say a physician made a mistake. The lawyer said, never admit the mistake. It's bad for court, yes? But it has a higher probability of not getting there.
I think that pertains to many different industries.
Oh yeah. And for those of us who are old enough to remember love story, love means never having to say you're sorry. Well, unfortunately, politics means never having to say you're sorry, and that's not good. That does not foster trust. And I think that's something else that goes here. But talking about fear, I think something else that happened, and it happened here in Israel, it doesn't affect everybody the same way. There's this old law in individual psychology called the Yerkes-Dodson law. That's really more than a century old. Two American psychologists who quantified it. That if you want to improve people's performance in many things, if you increase the amount of stress you put on them, you get a performance. This is why we have, for example, exams in the university, because if we would tell the students, this is really important, but we know you're adults and you want to do a good job, so we're sure you're going to study this, and before we go on, that'll be the end of it, So likewise with the police and enforcing traffic regulations. So people have to be stressed to a certain degree in order to improve their performance. However, once you increase the stress beyond a certain point, performance is going to go down. People are going to get overwhelmed. People are going to get traumatized. From the fright or flight, you're going to move on to freeze, which is not good. And I think that because the point where that happens, where people start panicking, is different for different individuals. That point is not uniform for the whole population. What would only get some people to start complying with the party line, might get others to really panic. And I think, looking back, at least here in Israel, I think that the system made the mistake of scaring people too much and thereby bringing on two types of responses. One of which we've discussed here, and that is that people are so frightened that it's very hard to get them out of their holes once the bulk of the danger has gone down. But the other is that people just become reckless and careless, and because of the reasons that Dan mentioned, they say, well, nothing happened. These guys are just, fussing around with our minds, and who cares, and they move on.
You're both really stressing the issue of trust.
Yep.
And the information that was conveyed, maybe mixed messaging, initially being a little too lax and then really scaring the population. How concerned are you both seeing that experts are talking about a second wave that could be worse? What, from a professional standpoint, what can be done? Because to me, it's very startling to hear you say this.
Yeah, well, it's tough. There's a very important issue here that we haven't raised before that I'd like to raise our attention to, and this is the following: we've only been talking about the COVID-19 crisis and casualties who died from the illness, the SARS virus. And I think once you do that, and I think we've all done it throughout the world, and you in the media really were conveying that, once you do that, you get into tunnel vision. You only look at what happens with COVID, and you only measure the casualties of the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. And when you do that, you miss the whole picture. And I think this is my impression, that, and this is on a worldwide level for reasons that could be understood, by focusing so much on what's happening with COVID and stopping COVID, I think we've done a bad job in addressing many other ailments in society, some of which are ongoing, for example, the economic situation, and some of which are really the direct consequences of the precautions and the steps we've been taking to protect us from Corona. And those are things like hospitals not functioning properly because they were silenced, and right now economy not recovering back. And I would say that if we don't only count the number of people who've died from Corona, we might see that casualties about other things have gone way up because of stress, because of undiagnosed malignancies, because of unbalanced diabetes in many people who did not show up to get their periodic tests or to renew the prescriptions. And I really hope that by the next wave, people are going to understand that the job of COVID specialists is to decrease and control pandemics. And that's what they're good at doing, and that's what they're being paid to do. But that's not the whole picture. And I really hope when the next wave hits, that the people who are in decision-making, who have the decision-making powers, would be brave enough and honest enough to say, you know, this is terrible and the danger is not completely over. However, we're going to have to sustain some kind of damage, you know, in order not to shut down the economy and bring all this collateral damage that we have.
Sure, which again comes back to trust. And we also saw here people not going, people stopped taking, you know, or making regular visits or going to the doctor for other medical conditions, and that had devastating results.
Yeah, and Dan is absolutely right that trust is key, because if what was permissible, what was really understandable, you know, during the first step when we really didn't know what the pandemic might do, I think that fears of the Spanish influenza have been greatly exaggerated. But you know, that's perfect hindsight. But now we do know how bad it can get. And so I think the second time around, if people say, look, we might have, we did overestimate it the first time around, we really didn't know. Now we think it's safe enough for you to do this and that, and we might sustain some casualties, but we really think that the costs outweigh the benefits. I think people will be more understanding.
Handling of it.
Right.
Jan,
yeah, so I think what you're asking is really about a very interesting paradoxical result. So you say we were in a lockdown, Israel, in reducing the amount of people who got sick and passed away, but the experience of people is that this is not a big deal. So paradoxically, like if we were less successful and more people got sick and more people got passed away, then for the next wave, if there will be one, people would be more prepared to take personal costs, stay at home and so on. But paradoxically, and this is going back to the notion that we talked about experience, because the probability of getting sick in Israel and the probability of dying in Israel was so low, the experience of people is this is not such a bad deal. So I think we're going to enter, if there will be a next wave, with feeling of no. We know Corona. It was here before, and nothing bad happened. Now, nothing bad happened partially because we were such in quarantine, but that's not how people are going to interpret it. People are going to interpret it. I've been in this for 3 months. It's really not a big deal. So there is a risk, again, like texting and driving and other things, that the strong measures in phase 1, the relative success, is teaching people the wrong lesson for wave 2. And that means that wave 2, I think, will be much harder to mobilize people in the right way. Because instead of having the Spanish flu in the back of our mind as the fear, we'll have these personal experience of 3 months when nothing bad happened, and now we'll have really hard time getting young professionals in Tel Aviv when they saw nothing negative.
And of course, without the trust, why should they listen once again to the government? We're very short on time, but I would love to hear some advice, some tips to end on a positive note. We are expecting another wave. People are stressed. People are going to remain stressed. And this is something, modern society brings with it regardless, and COVID has made it go up the roof. Dan, let's start with you. Some tips. How can we maintain, sustain some form of good mental health and mental standing?
Okay, so I think this is going to be with us for a while, right? Second wave, no second wave. This is with us for a while. There's going to be a new normal. And if we talk about kind of one of the underlying things as being stress and inability to control, I think we need to bring some control into our lives. One form of control is called shopping therapy. I'm not recommending it, but it's one way, right? And the reason shopping therapy is a sense of control is you take your credit card, you do something, you change the state of the world. Expensive, but that's one way. Another way to gain control is in small things, right? It's true that we can't get all of the control and we can't get everything back, but we need to get some control. So, for example, push-ups are very good. My hands are badly injured. I can't do push-ups, but stomach crunches. And the reason I recommend that rather than walking, for example, is that walking, you can't really see an improvement. But if you do push-ups or something like this, every few days you can feel that you're doing one more. Or if you do meditation. So take something that you could see visible improvement happening on a relatively quick basis and do that. And then Yora mentioned our social nature. We're social creatures. What is so unique and amazing about us is that we have the capacity to care about the people. We have the capacity for collective action, for altruism, and so on. And I think this period of Zoom meetings is taking away some of that. And I think we need to figure out how do we maintain social relationship, how do we do things for other people. I'll just tell you that for me, most of the day I sit in front of this laptop in meetings. When I want to have a social meeting, I do it on my iPhone or an iPad. I move to a different corner in the house and I do it slightly different. I'm basically kind of using signals to myself that says, this is not work. Now, it's this corner of the table that is social time, this corner, slightly different device, but we need to realize that social relationship fuel us and give us hope and give us a sense of connection. They give us resilience.
Yoram, how do we get over this this physical divide to create that social feeling? And is that really what we need most during a time like this?
Absolutely, we do. That's one other thing with which I agree with Dan. I think that we're totally dependent on our social networks, and I think sustaining them, maintaining them, keeping them alive, keeping the flow of good vibes and even bad vibes moving back and forth, I think that's absolutely essential. And I think that's been one of the upsides of this happening now. During the Spanish flu, people could only send letters to each other that would arrive 3 weeks later. So I think from that perspective, we're in a much better place. And frankly, I've been sitting here and I've been agreeing with everything that Dan said. So I'm glad that there's one single thing that we don't completely agree on. I do agree. I think it's absolutely essential to engage in physical activity. And I think that's because the pandemic has enforced us passivity. And passivity is the root of all evil. People get traumatized. We know that the chances of soldiers to sustain PTSD are directly and strongly proportional to the degree to which they feel helpless to change the situation around them. And I think that key to that, and because experiencing is much more important than what you know cognitively, I think that not being locked down in one place is so important. So my advice would be, during the next round, get out of the house. People don't get the virus just because it's flowing in the wind. People get the virus from being close to other people. So things that you can do, physical activity that you can do out there, go walking, go running, keeps you on your feet. And we need to move. And I think that in many countries, in Israel too, the authorities realized that and made the appropriate exceptions in the scare tactics. They said, well, if you're going to do exercise, do that. And I think that's one thing that's extremely important. And it's also important because sitting down at home makes us gain weight. The average Israeli gained 2 kilograms during this 4 pounds. During this time. You got to shed them. So I would say from earlier on to keep people moving. It's incredibly important. It's also an antidepressant. 35 minutes of intense aerobic exercise is equivalent to taking an SSRI in terms of prevention and treatment of depression. So I would stress that, and I would stress, as Dan said, the social relationships. It's the end all be all.
So to conclude, we have to not be passive. Physical activity, shopping. I definitely wrote that. I wrote that down. Shopping makes you feel better because it gives you control. I'm okay with that. And social interaction, and to try to find a divide between your work life and your social life, even when we can't actually see each other in person. Gentlemen, this has been such a pleasure, and I have so many more questions, but we're out of time. Thank you so much. Really such a treat.
Thank you very much.
You too. And hang in there. And hang in there.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
I would like to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Professor Dan Ariely. I've been really looking forward to this. Now, for all the behavioural science geeks in the audience, Dan probably doesn't need introducing, but he is Professor of Psychology and Behavioural Economics at Duke University and is best known for his work on irrationality and his many best-selling books, including Predictably Irrational and The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, and, of course, some very, very popular TED Talks along the way. Now, I interviewed Dan a few years ago for the BBC, and I've been putting into practice some advice he gave me during that interview, which was never to pay a friend for a favour. And that the moment you bring money into a situation like that, when a favour's happening, then it starts to monetize it, it starts to change their thinking, and they start to think, well, you know, is this a good deal for changing your tyre for you? Perhaps it's not. Perhaps you should be paying more. I could earn more money doing something else. And his advice was instead to give a gift afterwards. Now, it's a win-win, because actually the gift is usually, they like it better, and the gift is usually cheaper than the amount of money you would have paid. So that is one tip. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what tips he might have for us today. We're very excited because he's going to talk about some of his more recent work, which you may not have heard about. So please welcome me in joining Dan Ariely.
Thanks a lot, and good morning. Before I start, you might have noticed that I have half a beard. You might have wondered why I didn't wake up late or lose a bet. Many years ago, I was badly burned, so most of my body is covered with scars, including the right side of my face, hence the half beard. I say it in the beginning because somebody told me that unless I say what this half a beard is from, people continuously think about why is this half a beard and don't focus on the talk. So now we've covered facial hair. We can move on. In general, in life, I have two hats. I'm part of a group at the university at Duke called the Center for Advanced Hindsight. Good name. And we mostly study financial decision-making and health. I'm also part of a group called Kaima in Israel that works exclusively with the Israeli government. And today I want to say kind of two general things. I want to tell you a little bit about our process of working, how we think about it, and then I want to give you examples from our work with the Israeli government that would illustrate different parts of this process. So, you know, we're all here for the same reason. We want to think about how we use principles from social science, behavioral economics to design the world, right? I mean, we want to understand why people do what they do, but the ultimate goal is to change behavior. And why do we care about this? Because if we look at the world, we can't look at it and be happy, right? And that's one of the things I think that is so unique to behavioral economics is in standard economics, you look at the world and you say, that's the outcome of about 8 billion rational people. That's what we can achieve. In behavioral economics, we say, no, the world can be much better. In fact, this is the outcome of 8 billion irrational people making mistakes all the time. And we can do so much better. And if you think about this gap, the gap between where we are and where we could have been, it's very sad because we have things like we misuse our time and we misuse our money and we waste our health and we have hate and we don't have enough motivation in all kinds of things. We waste the environment. There's all kinds of really, really sad things. The good news is we can make progress, right? So I choose to look at the glass half full. There's lots of room for improvement, and we have the tools to try and think about how we reduce this gap between what we have and where we could be. Now, when most people think about this challenge, including many people in governments, the usual answer is, let's just give people information, right? If people are not doing the right thing, let's just tell them, right? And people would immediately change. But the sad reality is that giving people information almost never works. And you can just think some examples like medication adherence, we know information doesn't work. Exercise, we know doesn't work. I mean, just think about it yourself for a second. How many people here in this room have not exercised enough in the last month? Smoking, of course, is one of those cases. How many people here in this room in the last month have eaten too much? Okay, just a few more examples. How many people in this room in the last month have at least once texted while driving? Okay, so we have an honesty gap here. Let's try a couple of more. How many people here in the last month have not always washed your hands when you left the bathroom? Give you one last chance for honesty. How many people here have ever, not just the last month, have had unplanned, unprotected sex? One proud person. The point is that for lots of things, we know that information doesn't work, right? And we've tried it over and over and over, and it's usually a good thing to try at some point. The challenge is that in many cases, it's the only thing that we try, and we're yet to discover places where purely giving people information really works. So if not information, then what? So I want to kind of present to you a very, very simple model of behavioral change. It's a model that we all kind of use in some way. And I think about it as friction and fuel. We take a particular behavior, and the first step we're looking at is to say, what can we take away? What is there about this process that is unneeded, that is holding people back? The apples are a little too far away. The drawer in the refrigerator that holds fresh fruit and vegetables is a little too far and opaque, hard to reach. All kinds of little things that are in the way. And then the second part, which is much more complex, by the way, is to say, how do we add motivation? Right? We have a particular behavior. The behavior is about some long-term benefit. Right now, it's not that exciting. What kind of motivation we can add? Think about it like cooking, where you say, what kind of spices can I add? It's a much more creative, complex process, and many times we have to add motivation that have nothing to do with a particular activity. We want kids to study, we add exams. It's not really the important thing, but we all of a sudden create a measurement tool, and we create some competition and create other incentives that are irrelevant to the true nature of what we want people to do, is to study, but we add it now. We want people to lose weight, and we add Weight Watchers, right? We add some competition and social embarrassment and other things like that. So that's the general model we'll start with, and let's start with friction, the things that are holding us back. In this particular case, so I'll give you one example. We try to get people to take less cash from ATM machines. Why? Cash has all kinds of negative things for society, including funding terrorism, but also not paying taxes. So it's a good thing to try and reduce the amount of cash. And we looked at the system, and the system has lots of places. There are ATMs themselves. There's money that you pay to small businesses that you might be tempted to pay with cash rather than to pay with electronic payment. And of course, there's things like credit cards and so on. So you have ATMs, you have receipts, you have credit cards, all of those things. We've done experiments on all of them. But right now, I'll tell you a little bit about one experiment on ATMs. And this is in Hebrew. This is not in Hebrew. But the experiment was done in Israel in Hebrew, and this is just a general description of how an ATM looks like. You go in, you put your card, you get lots of numbers, you get to pick one. And we tried lots of things. One thing we tried was to take all of those numbers and make them smaller. Not just a regular anchor when you have one number, but we said, what if the whole set of numbers was regular, whatever they have in the beginning, slightly lower or much lower. We also decided to pick a default. There's one button that has been pre-selected for you. Either 400 shekels, about 100 pounds, or 250 shekels. We also tried other things, like we tried to frighten people. We said, if people took over a certain amount, we said, you know, just so you know, we're writing down your name and the numbers of these bills. And we'll keep it in our records until the bills show back up into the banking system. We didn't actually, I mean, we told them this. We didn't really track the numbers. You said ethical questions about experiment. Small scale experiment. We just wanted to see if it's worthwhile, and we also changed the fees. Right now there's a fee, and if you think about the fee, it actually, if it's a fixed fee, it gives people an incentive to take a lot of money because it amortizes the fee, so you're getting less. So we said, what if the fee had different levels? It started with free, or started with very small, and then it went up. So we tried lots of things. Here's the final answer. The winner had everything, right? The winner had default and anchoring, small amounts of money. We gave people the incentives and so on, and it reduced the amount of money people took from 630 shekels, right? It's about 4 to 1 for the pound, to 318. So we did a big gap, but what you can see is that just anchoring and making a small default of 250 got you all the way there, almost all the way there. Right? How much of it was the financial incentives? Not that much. How much of it was the frightening message about keeping track of the numbers? Not that much. We could do a lot of the work just by changing the total numbers and picking a default. Of course, financial incentives work by themselves, but that was the first experiment. Very simple, right? Take the interface for the ATM, change multiple things, see what works. Now we're ready to roll it out. Okay. There are other things we've done. We've done prize invoices, right? So we gave people incentives to ask for an official receipt because they could submit that and get prizes. Lots of things to say about that. We also created a system where small businesses have a reputation that they can keep, maintain, and increase if they use electronic transactions, and small businesses really wanted it. The idea was that as they accumulate their reputation, our version of the tax authority would be nicer to them if they ever found out that they make mistakes, so you get to build reputation. All of those things work. Okay, so that's part one, friction. Just think about what's the button, change the default, change the numbers showing on the screen, get people to think a little bit in a different way, change the financial incentives, all of those work. Fuel, motivation. This is a kind of an experiment that a lot of us in this room have been doing before. People set up appointments to go to see a physician or have some exam, and many of them don't show up. Some for good reasons, some for bad reasons. The bad reason is just not showing up. The good reason is that by the time people get to the appointment, sometimes they're healthy. So, then they shouldn't show up. But lots of people don't show up. Very bad for the system. And there was this system before we came up that gave people reminders. 5 days before, send one reminder. 3 days before, send another reminder. And the reminder was basically like very dry, saying, you have an appointment. Please show up. Or if you're not showing up, tell us that you're not going to show up. Not showing up is fine, right? If people just told us. We approached the system and changed lots of things. We had a request from a person, right? Rather than anonymous, we said there's a person wanting that. We said it's a national effort to try to reduce that. We said most people show up, social proof. We told them how much it would cost the medical system if they don't show up. We said it's important for their family that they show up. All kinds of things like that. A selection of things that we thought could work. The good news, we ran this on about 160,000 people. The good news was that almost everything was better than the standard system. By the way, when you do these things, sometimes you wonder, like, who designed that? Right? It's so easy to do better. Like, did somebody actually put some thought into designing this prompt? I was actually very happy that the thing that worked the best was saying that there's another patient that could use your system. I don't know if this is unique to Israel or not, right? It's a question of solidarity in society and so on, what would work the best. But it was nice to find out that that was the message that worked the best. We saved with this message about 400,000 waiting days in the country. It's a small country, so if it was a big country, it would be more. And then we did something else. We said, look, we did an RCT. We sent everybody the same message, and we can find out. I mean, randomly. We took 8 groups. Everyone got their own message. That's a good thing. But we have lots of people. Can we start to analyze what kind of people react better to which messages? We have the statistical improvement, but which one? So we created a very complex AI model that basically took into account everything we knew about the people. What clinic was it? Which part of the country? How often have they been in that clinic before? Have they been people who have been not responding in general, like people who are kind of characteristically not showing up, or do they have a good reputation for doing that? And we said, what else can we squeeze from the data if we got a system that tailored for each person the message that would fit them specifically? And basically, we got a situation where we reduce no-show from 21% to about 14% with the standard message. I showed you somebody else could do it. And we could get another reduction to 12.5% if we did kind of an AI personalization. There's a couple of things here. One is that the vast majority of the work, everybody could get the same message, right? If you think about the big bulk of the improvement, it was from using one message. You could tweak a little bit more and get some other benefits, certainly worthwhile doing, why not? But sometimes we say, oh, if we could just do the AI exercise, we will get the best result. I think mostly it's like 80-20. We could get much, much better by getting the right message, and then we can tweak around the edges and get a bit more. No reason not to do it, but let's not put too much weight on just that approach. Okay, so that was friction and fuel. Let's change the default and so on, and then the fuel is let's add motivation. Let's remind you that it costs people money, that your family wants you to show up, that your physician wants you to show up, somebody else could use the time and the appointment, and let's see what motivates people to do something. However, and I have to say this was kind of a surprise for me as I left my regular lab research and started doing research in the field. Sometimes I'm realizing that we actually don't know where we're going. When we design an experiment and we think about friction and fuel, we need to know what the objective is. But the reality is that there are many questions that the Israeli government poses to us that we find out that we're not really sure what the question is and what direction we want to go. And then we need to take a step back and say, let's just collect data. Let's just start to understand what's really going on. And this is becoming a bigger part of our lives, trying to understand what's the setup, where are we trying to go. So in this case, we decided to look at transportation. Transportation, a huge problem around the world, as you know. And we try to kind of even figure out what is the landscape, what are the possibilities, what kind of things can we do. So we started by analyzing cellular data. We planted, anyway, let's not talk about this. We magically got data from almost every citizen in the country about where they live and where they work and how they drive to school, and do they stop in the way to take their kids to work, and do they have a bicycle and a dog, and all kinds of things like that. How consistent are they in their commute, all kinds of things like that. And we started mapping, and in this particular case, we mapped one big industrial part, high-tech park, where lots of people come in and leave to work. And the first thing we mapped was the hours of the day, and when was the peak. How did the distribution of arrival happen? And you know, traffic is a very non-linear system, right? It's the last 10% is creating a tremendous amount of damage on the whole system. So of course you can see that 9 o'clock in the morning is a really terrible hour. If you could just shift people a little bit up or down, you could create a lot of benefit. We also looked at when people leave, slightly less concentrated, but not a good pattern either. We didn't settle for this. We also tried to figure out what are the types of vehicles, because we have cell phone data, so we don't know. But so we have cameras on the way in and out of that particular part, and we analyze what kind of transportation people have. Lots of private cars, very few buses, very few bicycles, and so on. We also looked at the purpose, why people show up. Mostly it was work commuting. Okay. Then we could look at things like, what's the distance from work? And we found that about 5% of the people live 1.5 kilometers away from work. That's not a lot of distance, right? If you could just convince those people. And if you look at 5 kilometers, it was 26%, right? This kind of data, by the way, was a big surprise. Like if you look at how governments in general, in this case not just Israel, plan transportation, it's usually a guy with a pencil and a map that draws where public transportation is. It's shocking how little data there is to do these things. But when you look at this data, you start to understand there's lots of benefit by understanding where people are. We also use some drones to try and figure out a bigger range and where there are challenges. You can see here the map and the junctions from all around. And we try to figure out how does the congestion happen on those. Is there a particular junction that is the cause to this? Is there something about traffic light that are causing the challenge? Analyze those drones, these images as well. And it is true that when you look at an area, a lot of time the congestion is happening outside of the area. It's just a ripple effect. Okay. Then the next thing we did was we tried to figure out per anonymous resident what are their potential of using public transportation, right? So we basically simulated and we say if those people, if each person that we have in our database wanted to take public transportation or bus or walking or taking a bicycle, what is their potential for doing this? And we mapped, in this case, only a small part of the country by saying what is the potential for current public transportation. And we saw that there's a lot of people who have this potential but are not doing it. Those are only people who are driving. And we wanted to see, do they have even a potential of using public transportation? By the way, public transportation in Israel is not so good, very much unlike London, for example. But even though it's not so good, we felt that there's a lot of potential for people to take it, because as you'll see, people's perception of how terrible it is, people perceive it to be much worse than it really is. Okay, so we have several data, we have drones, we have this public transportation fit analysis, and now it's time to figure out, can we do some experiments and move behavior? We felt that there's a potential, right? That was the first thing, can people even take public transportation? What is the potential? Now we can start doing experiments. So the first thing we did was we said, what's the high potential? The green dots I showed you before, and it turns out there's a huge potential for the green dots. There's a huge potential to take people who are currently driving a car to move to transportation. We also did, we simulated the following question. We said, imagine that we would approach people who are living next to each other and driving almost every day to the same place and coming back to the same place, that we did kind of a matching approach. What is the probability that we will find two people who live up to 1 kilometer away from each other, live to work and back 15 minutes apart from each other, and go to work and back at the same time? If we could do that from privacy perspective and so on, the potential is about 90% of the people. So about 90% of the people, we could find a match like this, which is quite incredible, but tells you these are solvable problems. We just need to get the data and start working on this. Okay, so there's a high potential for public transportation, biking or walking. There were 33% of the people that we felt with some effort could get there. But even if we could only take 16% of the cars out of the road, that's a lot. That's a lot. You can't recognize a system that takes 10% of the cars out. So we tried lots of things. We tried a system where we encourage businesses and individuals to work flexible hours, which means to stay at home one day and work from home, or leave a little later, come back earlier. Lots of advantages there. We tried what we call a personal commuting plan, which I'll tell you a bit more about, and then we tried some financial incentives. Personal commuting, we did it with one company, and we basically set, not we, but we got consultants to sit with each of the employees and create for them an opportunity map of what else they could do. And you know, the question was, do people even know what are their alternatives? It turns out people had no idea what their alternatives are. We think people know, but they didn't. Most people got an idea of what they could do instead. And what we showed is that 63% of them have tried alternative commuting plans during the trial, during a few months of the trial. We also paid them during the trial. 38% of those kept on doing it 6 months after we ended the trial. Right? So we had a couple of months of a trial in which we incentivized people to use other paths. 38% of them kept on doing it for 6 months afterward, and 76 were either satisfied or very satisfied with their other options. So it does mean that there are other options. We just need to help people identify them. We also tried to pay people not to enter the city. And paying people not to enter the city in rush hour is an effective mechanism. And then we did another experiment on framing. So we tried to figure out what happens with loss aversion, what happens if we prepay people. And you can see this in yellow. Paying in advance works better than paying later. Lower numbers here are better on this graph. And we also compared framing. What happens if we give the money in cash? What happens if we give it for a saving plan for their kids, for college? And what happens if we just give them discounts on license fees for the car? It turns out the best approach was to give them discount on license fees for the car, and paying in advance, saying if you don't do it, you'll have to give the money back. And with this approach, we could incentivize people in the best way not to use their cars. We're now working on other things like that, including congestion tax. Okay, so we talked about friction, fuel, and then that sometimes we just need to put a serious effort to understand what is actually going on before we can even propose any intervention. The next thing that we think about the process is to say, and then how do we scale, right? A lot of time we start with small experiments, but the reality is that if they end up being complex experiments that we can't scale, that's not our goal to change policy. So we try to figure out how do we scale, and specifically we are trying to figure out what do we do with technology to scale our solutions. In this particular project, we were trying to get more kids particularly more young women, to study the things that would allow them to be scientists, and particularly computer scientists down the road. Every country wants more science technology. Israel is no exception. There's a big gender gap. We try to both fix the gender gap and increase the number in general. And we started with a survey that asked young women and young men why they're not studying computer science. The most standard answer we got was it's too difficult. And there was a big gap between what girls answered and what boys answered on that particular end. It makes sense that that might be the difference. Now, we'll come back to this. We then look at the process. Kids choose a major in high school, then they choose an academic degree, then they choose a career. The next part of intervention that we tried to catch was the place where people choose an academic degree. So there's an academic degree, you get to choose what you want to study at university, there's a website, you get to choose. We tried to intervene at that particular point with absolutely no success. Most likely because it was too late. Right? It's true that people came to the website to choose, but they probably chose before. They were not really choosing, they were just executing the choice. So we said, okay, let's go earlier. Let's try and attack it when people choose a major for high school. And actually, this was a nice story of failure. When we started, there's a lot of things like computer science light courses. I'm sure you have them in every country, where you say, oh, let's just give them a 3 or 6 week-long computer science light class, and at the end of it, everybody would want to be a computer scientist. And the very nice people from the government said, why don't you help us digitize this? So right now, it's very manpower intensive. Why don't you digitize that course so we can give it at scale to everybody? We said, fine, but let's first check that it works. So we took the best class we could find, and we did a before-after evaluation with a control group, people who studied neuroscience instead of computer science. And what do you think happened? Oh, actually, you can see it here on the slide. What happened was that it had no benefit for the boys, and it made the girls less likely to want to study computer science. And by the way, this is the thing that everybody does. Google, Microsoft, everybody does those classes. Right? Nobody bothered to ever evaluate them. But we also had such a strong intuition that it has to be wrong that we repeated the experiment. We repeated the experiment with the same results. Doesn't do anything for boys, make it less likely for girls. Now, this was a tough process because we didn't know even where to start to figure out why it doesn't work. But it took us a while, and then we figured out. We figured out at the end of those 3 to 6 weeks of computer science light, the girls knew that they could do it, but they thought it was unbelievably boring. Right? Because what happened in the first 3 to 6 weeks of computer science light is you learn how to move a turtle on the screen. And at the end of this, the girl said, yes, I can do it, but who wants to do it for a living? Like, you know what? What kind of work is this? The boys didn't mind too much. It was sufficiently... You know, it was just like another computer game. I think they were just not thinking about purpose and meaning and so on of what do we actually try to achieve. So anyway, so instead we did something else. We ran around the country and we filmed young people, but particularly young women who are doing computer science and something. Computer science and technology, computer science and design, computer science and health, computer science and education. And what we did was we created a website where the kids got to choose what they want to study in high school. Right? But through that website, they had to see these professions. And the idea was that the barrier here was not the barrier, I can't do it. The barrier was, what do I want to do? Anyway, we did this major selection website. We filmed a day in the life of all kinds of people, particularly young women, and we increased the number of people who, by about 20%, the number of particularly boys, but even more with girls, who chose to study things that could qualify them to be computer scientists down the line. I mean, there's still lots of ways, and there are many more intervention points that we need to go through, but as a starting point, it seems to be good. I want to mention one more part for our process, right? So we say figure out the data, friction, fuel, scale. Sometimes there are very complex trade-offs to make as social scientists. And the trade-offs are because we actually expand the scope of dimensionality of what are we thinking about as our objective. In this particular case, we're trying to increase tax compliance. And think about tax compliance. You can frighten people. You can tell them what the government is doing for them. You can try and get them to feel there's reciprocation. There's all kinds of ways to do it. And the thing about it is that we need to think about not just how do we get more taxes, which is a very proximal, simple measure, but we also have to think about what are the attitudes of the people that we're dealing with. What is their sense of what is their role in the country? So we're trying to, if you're trying to get people to use less cash, relatively simple. If you're trying to get people to pay taxes, you have to think about how do they think about themselves as citizens. If we just frighten them, and even if we get them to pay more taxes, is this the right objective function? So what we're trying to do now is to also think about expanding the scope, thinking about more dimensions of our interventions, and thinking about how do we trade them off. We're moving into more complex area, but that's what we're doing. And in this particular case, I told you we're trying to do things on tax evasion, and we're trying to think about well-being, trust of the government. We're trying to think about things like how people view their role in society. We're doing things like sending people pamphlets that tell them what the government does with their taxes. We're doing things that try to increase trust in the tax authority, and measuring those other dimensions as well. And it actually creates a situation where there's no real right answer. At some point, you have to trade off goodwill toward the government versus more taxes. How do we make those decisions? But it's something that we need to enter to the discussion. And I think it's our role, because some of the other measures are very simple. Just more money? No. Let's think about some other dimensions and complex trade-offs. And finally, in many ways, we need to recognize that we need to keep on retesting things. The world of physics is rather simple. Physics has not changed for many, many years. You learn something in physics, it stays. For us, things change all the time. The world before Facebook is a different world than the world after Facebook. If right now text messages work better than sending people letters, it doesn't mean that it will stay like this, because it could be that it's a matter of attention. People spend more attention to text messages, less to letters. Maybe in 5 years, it would be different. If we think about what professions kids, and particularly young women, find meaningful, maybe that would change as well. So in our world, we need to, I think, worry very much about what are the kind of things that are going to change, and we need to realize that this is something we need to work on. And there's a fear, I think, that we give governments a solution, and governments will implement that solution and will not consider changing it down the line. And it's our job to think about under what conditions do we need to do continuous. But every few years to go back and change and make sure that we're on the right path. So this is our kind of general process. Discovery, sometimes we don't need it. Friction and fuel, I think we all need it. Scale, almost all the time. Trade-offs, expanding the scope, and then retest retest when needed. I do want to mention that friction is not always bad. Sometimes we just say, but for example, this is my email. I went to a conference and they asked me to put my email. I said, I really don't want to. And they said, you have to. So these are the first 100 and some characters from the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy. Good sorting mechanism. If you think about what we've achieved over the last 300 years or so as humanity, we've achieved tremendous things, right? It's amazing. Look at this wonderful room. We have lights, and we have air conditioning, and we have microphones, and we have seats. And on each of those things, we collectively have worked tremendously. Just think about a chair. It has arms and legs, and it has cushion. Just like even little things, like our bum is slightly sensitive, so we make the cushion exactly right. And you walk in London, and what an amazing city, what an amazing structure. And we have invested so much in the physical infrastructure of our lives. And I think it's because it's so easy for us to see we're not Superman. Right? So we have Superman, can fly, we can't. Right? We say, let's invent planes. And Superman can run very fast, we can't, let's get cars. And Superman can sit for a long time, we can't, let's have a cushion. And, and everything that our fragile body is not able to do, we create technology to do it. And we kind of wrap ourselves with technology, and we didn't come with a perspective of saying, let's change humanity. Like, let's be cold resistance. No, let's build heaters, and let's get better clothes, and so on. Let's make ourselves, being able to run faster. No, not going to work. Let's get cars. And if you think about it, we've spent so much of our time and effort and so on improving, creating an infrastructure for our limited physical ability. What about our mind? Right? People have made lots of jokes about Brexit, but it's hard not to, right? You sit. You look at this amazing city, and you say almost everything that is physical has been done here in an amazing way. Public transportation, pedestrian crossing, the design of the light, cross and don't cross, things, everything, like it's an amazing city. And then you look at the cognitive capacity to make decisions. And what are the tools? What are the tools for our minds? Right? What are the tools that we're making for our mind? And how important those are? And I think we have this thing where in the physical world, we see our limitations so clearly, it's very hard to avoid it. In the mind, I think it's much easier to keep the illusion that we're all knowing, all able, and capable, and we're not building the same tools. But those tools are just as important. And I'll give you one very simple example. Think about credit cards. What do credit cards as a tool for payment get us to do? There's something called the pain of paying. And the pain of paying is the idea that when we spend money, we feel differently depending on the payment method that we use. So imagine tonight you're going to dinner. Imagine it's going to be £100, and you're paying with cash or with credit card. Which one is going to feel worse? The cash, right? Why? Imagine that I own the restaurant, and I figure out that people on average eat 100 bites and pay £100. And I came to you and I said, because you're such a wonderful person,